Iceland challenged England. In the early 1970s, one of the most unusual wars in the world was raging in the icy waters of the North Atlantic. There were no tanks in this war. There were no warplanes. There were no bombs either. But there were fish, the livelihood of millions, and a small island nation was challenging one of the world's most powerful maritime empires. This is the story of the Cod Wars between Iceland and Great Britain. Icelanders are dependent on the sea. In the 1970s, Iceland was not the developed or economically powerful country it is today. Its population was only around 200,000, and much of the country consisted of small, isolated fishing villages. Life in these villages revolved entirely around nature and the sea. People practiced the same profession for generations, maintaining their livelihoods within a life cycle passed down from father to son. Early in the morning, the harbours would come alive, and boats would set sail into the harsh and unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic. The sea was not just a workplace, but a way of life. A large part of Iceland's economy depended on fishing, and almost all of the country's export revenue came from the sea. Cod, in particular, was vital to the country. Its decline meant not only an economic loss, but also national collapse. People owed their homes, their children's education, and their futures to the fish from this sea. Therefore, for Iceland, fish was not just food, but the very reason for the nation's existence. Growing threat. By the late 1960s, scientists in Iceland began to uncover a worrying reality. Fish populations in the North Atlantic were rapidly declining. The main cause of this decline was the growing industrial fishing industry. British fishing fleets, in particular, were heavily involved in fishing in the region, with their highly advanced and large trawlers. These enormous vessels could catch vast quantities of fish by dragging nets hundreds of meters long along the seabed. Traditional fishing with small boats had given way to industrial-scale production. Each year, more ships went out to sea, more fish were caught, and marine resources were rapidly being depleted. Icelandic experts warned that if this trend continued, cod stocks could collapse. This was not just an environmental issue, but a major crisis threatening the economic future of a nation. Historic decision. In 1972, the Icelandic government reached a point where it could no longer ignore the situation unfolding in its surrounding waters. For years, intensive foreign fishing activity had been steadily depleting one of the nation's most vital natural resources. The North Atlantic, once abundant with cod and other marine life, was showing clear signs of exhaustion. Faced with this growing crisis, the Icelandic government made a bold and controversial decision that shocked the international community. It announced that the country's fishing zone would be extended from 12 nautical miles to 50 nautical miles. This was not a minor adjustment, but a dramatic expansion of maritime control that directly challenged established fishing rights in international waters. The implications of this decision were immediate and far-reaching. Foreign fishing vessels, many of which had operated freely near Icelandic waters for decades, would now be forced to stay much farther away from the coast. Areas that had long been considered open and accessible fishing grounds were suddenly being restricted and redefined. Within Iceland, the decision received widespread public support. For many Icelanders, this was not a political choice, but a matter of survival. Entire communities depended on the sea, and the rapid depletion of fish stocks threatened their livelihoods, their traditions, and the future of the nation itself. The government's action was seen as a necessary, even inevitable step to protect what remained of the country's economic foundation. However, outside Iceland, particularly in the United Kingdom, the reaction was very different. The British government and its powerful fishing industry rejected the new limits. British trawler fleets had operated in these waters for generations, and the newly imposed restrictions were seen as a direct threat to their economic interests. Fishermen and industry leaders placed strong pressure on their government, refusing to accept the loss of access to traditional fishing grounds. As tensions escalated, the disagreement began to take on a more serious and confrontational tone. What had started as an environmental and economic dispute was quickly evolving into a broader political conflict. The North Atlantic, once a shared and open fishing region, was now becoming the stage for a quiet but steadily intensifying maritime crisis that would soon draw international attention.
Tension at sea. Although Iceland had officially declared its new 50 nautical mile fishing limit in 1972, many British fishing vessels refused to recognise the decision. For decades, British trawlers had operated freely in the rich fishing grounds surrounding Iceland, and the British fishing industry considered these waters essential to its survival. As a result, fishing activities continued almost unchanged despite Iceland's declaration, causing tensions to rise with each passing week. Determined to enforce its sovereignty, the Icelandic government ordered the Icelandic Coast Guard to patrol the newly claimed waters. Although Iceland possessed only a handful of small patrol vessels, their crews were highly motivated and deeply committed to protecting the country's most valuable natural resource. These ships began monitoring foreign fishing vessels and repeatedly warned them to leave the area. The situation quickly escalated. In the cold and unforgiving waters of the North Atlantic, Icelandic patrol boats regularly confronted massive British trawlers. Through radio transmissions, Coast Guard officers demanded that foreign vessels cease fishing and withdraw from Iceland's newly established fishing zone. Many captains, however, ignored these warnings and continued their operations. Neither side was willing to retreat, and the confrontations became increasingly frequent. The dispute was not merely about fishing rights. For Iceland, fish represented the backbone of the national economy. At the time, nearly all of Iceland's export revenue depended on the fishing industry. Government officials feared that excessive foreign fishing would deplete fish stocks and threaten the country's economic future. Many Icelanders viewed the dispute as a fight for national survival rather than a simple territorial disagreement. Meanwhile, Britain faced pressures of its own. Entire coastal communities in England and Scotland relied on distant water fishing fleets for employment. Thousands of fishermen depended on access to Icelandic waters. Consequently, the British government found itself under growing pressure to defend the interests of its fishing industry and maintain access to the lucrative North Atlantic fishing grounds. As confrontations intensified, Iceland introduced a controversial new tactic. Icelandic Coast Guard vessels began using specially designed net cutters to sever the fishing nets of foreign trawlers operating within the disputed zone. This innovative method allowed Iceland to disrupt fishing operations without directly attacking the vessels themselves. Nevertheless, British captains viewed the tactic as an aggressive act, and tensions rose dramatically. Soon, collisions between vessels became increasingly common. Icelandic patrol ships and British fishing boats maneuvered aggressively around one another in rough seas. In some incidents, ships deliberately bumped or rammed each other. Although no full-scale military conflict erupted, the possibility of a dangerous escalation seemed increasingly real. The dispute gradually attracted international attention. Newspapers across Europe began reporting on what became known as the Cod Wars, a series of confrontations between Iceland and the United Kingdom over fishing rights. What initially appeared to be a regional fishing disagreement was rapidly evolving into a significant international issue involving diplomacy, economics, and national sovereignty. As the conflict deepened, Britain deployed Royal Navy frigates to protect its fishing fleet, while Iceland responded by intensifying Coast Guard operations. The sight of military warships escorting civilian fishing vessels through the stormy North Atlantic shocked many observers around the world. For a small nation of little more than 200,000 people, Iceland was boldly challenging one of the world's most powerful maritime nations. Few could have predicted how far the crisis would develop. Within a few short years, The dispute would strain diplomatic relations, threaten NATO unity during the Cold War, and become one of the most remarkable examples of a small country successfully defending its economic interests against a much larger power. What had begun as a disagreement over fishing boundaries was on its way to becoming one of the most famous maritime disputes of the 20th century.